of faith. Her husband way down. Her bills were still way up. And she is at rope's end. It began a snowball. The wife of the son of a prophet is standing, wringing her hands, staring through the kitchen window. What am I going to fix? And she's tempted like this well for God doing this bad to me. I'm just going to be real today. Is this all right? Persuasion of do what control. When Paul said, I've been in death's oft. But he also said he was in the household in this place. There's still enough oil in your house for a miracle. I want you to think about it. Matter of fact, the word, I looked it up. I'm going to piggyback. It comes from the Hebrew word nashah. It means an extortioner. It's somebody that gives you a loan of beguiling and deceiving you so that they can spread your business and not follow through with their side of the bargain. I'm going to give you, but in reality, there was something in the fine print that said if you even breathe twice on Thursday, it's going to be 30% interest. Because that's what the creditor wants to do. The creditor looks different in every generation. The lender looks different in every generation. In the 60s, the lender looked like hippies. We're lending you peace and joy. We're lending you the ability to rebel and revolt. In the 80s, the lender looked like the punk rockers with the crazy hairdos and the. For the 2000s, for the millennial, the lenders look like people that have an entitlement mentality. But now the lender is a deep sense of sensual revolution and gender identity. But every lender is and the creditor is an extortioner. What he's lending to you for a moment is not what he's going to exact from you. Ask Samson if one night lent to him and her little body was all that he got. No, he got a whole lot more than he bargained for, because in the closet were friends. The lender in every generation looks different. But in every generation, he's an extortioner. He comes to give you what you feel like you can't live without. But the end of the bill is always more than you can pay. And sometimes we feel like we're putting out more than we can take in. But I want to give somebody a word in this house today. There's enough oil still left in your house for God to work with and work on and bring a miracle into your household. But it boils down to this. The widow had saved what she valued the most. She had gotten rid of her last can of beans. She had sold her flower arrangements. She had gotten rid of her what? Her recliner. Yeah. She hadn't gotten rid of the brooch that Grandma had left her. She had done gotten rid of the four-wheeler. She had gone on eBay and put her Louis Vuitton on eBay. She was serious. Because I'm down to nothing for my boys to eat. And what makes matters worse is they were born in the house of a son of a prophet. And what could be on them is not being represented by what's in my house. I have nothing left. But I'm willing to get rid of everything. Save this pot of oil. What she valued the most. Now, you go back to the story. I know some of you think, oh, God, here he goes. It's going to be long-winded. No. You go back to the story of Elijah when he got to the woman's house. It had just a little bit of oil and a little bit of meal. She had just a little bit of two things. But when you get to this woman who's in the double portion generation, she didn't have any meal, but she had a pot of oil. Because every time she went to the store, if she could only afford this much meal, she was going to make sure she could afford some more oil. That if I run out of everything else, I'm going to have some oil left over. I don't want just enough oil to bake another cake. I want to make sure if I got nothing else left to bake a cake with, there's still some oil in the cupboard. I don't want it to be balanced out. I want more anointing in my house than I want anything else. I want more of a move of God in my house than I want anything else. I want the glory of God more than I want anything else. So every chance I get, every service, every prayer meeting, every time we're called to consecration and commitment and dedication, I'm going to make sure I'm going to get another pot of oil. If I only have this many crumbs left to bake a cake with, but I've got a whole pot of oil, I'd rather have more oil and run out of everything else, because the oil will make a difference. It's not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. The oil still makes a difference. I've recently had to help people who were saying, I've got to make some changes. I've got to sell this and sell this just to make sure ends are meeting. I've got to get rid of this, pawn this off just to make sure ends are meeting. We're in a troubled generation. We may have to look at your neighbor and say, tighten your seatbelt for just 1 minute. I'm talking about I want to make sure there's some oil in the house. I may have to cut the cable TV off, but I'm not going to cut prayer off. I may have to let go of family land, but I'm not going to let go of my oil. I may have to cut off my subscription to the monthly expense of Jewish Better Homes and Gardens. But I'm not going to live without the oil. I may not spend $2.99 on the newest social platform that's coming out, but I will spend $2.99 on another bottle of oil. I want to make sure there's oil in the house. If there's nothing else left, I want to make sure I still know how to pray. If everybody else is in the hospital, I need to be able to pray. If everybody's losing their job, I need to know how to pray. If everybody's wounded and hurting, I need to know how to pray. I may have to let go of acceptance by my generation, but let me never let go of the word, and never let me go of the oil, and never let go of the consecration. Family, the whole family. He said some things I was going to say. We didn't compare notes, but the whole family participated. Somehow, that daddy had poured enough into those boys before he passed, that when mama came home from the prophet saying, this is what the prophet said, go borrow vessels. The boys said, vessels it is. It don't sound like much fun. No, but whether or not you live past tomorrow depends on us having some empty vessels in this house. Boys, why don't you go get some vessels? Look at your neighbor and say, it's time to get a bunch of vessels. The boys, everybody say the boys participated. The boys participated in the miracle. You know why? Because she said, all we've got is a pot of oil, but he said, get vessels. And her boys were going, oh, Jesus. I don't have time to preach. I really don't. Her boys were going to live the rest of their lives off of what their mother prioritized. There is a reason some people don't ever quit praying. It's because mom and dad prioritized it, and they live the rest of their lives. Y'all are real quiet, but there's there's a reason that some people never learn. Y'all, some of you have heard me say this. I'm sorry. I'm going to go just a few more minutes. Don't worry. Your roast is not going to burn. Some of you have heard me say this, and indulge me, please. There was a young man came to me one time telling me how God was dealing with him, and God wanted to use him, but he was as wishy-washy. He was as unstable. And so he decided it wasn't what he thought it was going to be. And so he come to me, Pastor, I got to leave. I said, that's fine, beautiful, wonderful. He said, can I come by your house? And on my way out of town, I just spent a couple hours. I said, oh, that's beautiful. Come on. And so I waited. For those that have heard this story, please just indulge me a minute. I waited until he was getting ready to come by, and I brought all my horses into the pen, and I had about 5 or 6 at the house right at that time. And when he got there, I said, you want to help me feed the horses? Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. I said, beautiful. I had a gorgeous mare. Man, she was just drop dead gorgeous. And she had papers. When I'm telling you she had papers, her dad was a world champion. Her grandfather is the most famous world grand champion in Tennessee walking horse history. And she had 3 more world grand champions on the bottom of her papers. She was loaded up. I'd got her on a steal. She was gorgeous. She could walk about 12 miles an hour, and I could drink coffee in the saddle and not even spill my coffee. She was so smooth. She had a big white blaze on her face and a black tail, and she was about this color gray with a black tail and white legs starting at the knees and big black long mane. I'm going to go buy some horses. But she had a problem. She had an attitude. Not when you was in the saddle. We had kids in the church. When we had the fun days, kids in the church was riding her. But when you pour feed in the feed trough, if another horse even looked at her trough, boy, she was swinging that rear end around. Don't look at your wife right now. She was swinging her rear end around, and she'd squeal, and she'd kick. I mean, not at you. She'd kick at the other horse. I mean, that horse could be from me to Marlene to her. But, brother, she was going to squeal and well, I was petting on her. I said, man, you see how pretty she is? Oh, boy, she's beautiful. I said, you know what her biggest asset is? He said, what's that? I said, her papers. He said, really? I said, oh, yeah. And I started explaining all the world grandchildren. I said, her grandfather's name was the Pusher C.G. And the Pusher, everybody wants his bloodline. They'll pay $10,000 for one stud fee. Everybody wants his bloodlines because he's got so many champions in the ring. And I started naming some of the other ones. And he's just a grin. I said, you know what? I said, so man, her bloodlines, everybody wants her bloodline. If I go breed her to a prize generator stud, man, I'm gonna have a horse that everybody wants and nobody can buy because I want it. I said, you know what her biggest liability is? He said, no, and he just grinned. I said, her papers. He said, what you mean? I said, because every mare that comes out of that bloodline has a bad attitude. They want the bloodline for the ring. But you can't put them around anything else because they're going to kick and squeal. They got a bad attitude. He's just a grinning. I said, you don't get it, do you, son? He said, no. I said, you fixing to. Your daddy was called to preach, and he has helped to bust up the 2 last churches he's been to. And the 2 pastors he said they hope to God he never walks back in their church. Your mother has the spirit of a harlot. She's a Jezebel and has bragged on splitting a church up. And the pastors have said they hope to God she never even comes back for a funeral or a wedding. They don't want her in their building. I said, here, you're called to preach, but you can't get past your papers. What you prioritize. So now that young man is hooked on dope, an MMA fighter. You wouldn't recognize him if you saw him. He used to come to this church. Because what you prioritize is what your kids will live off of. I want to unlock the door to hope and lock the door to hopelessness. There's enough oil in every house in this church to have a miracle in your family. But we got to get I want a miracle in my family. I said, I want a miracle in my family. So I'm going to prioritize keeping the oil. You can stand. I want you to think with me for just a moment. The oil that she had. Now, I'm not smart, Sister Loretta. But the oil that she had couldn't have been new. She didn't have any money to buy oil. It had to be something left over from some long time ago, Sister Tammy, when there was a lot more money in the house. Maybe her husband was still alive. Had this one pot left. For almost every family in this house, old oil around. Rayanne, Catherine, there's some old oil. I'm not trying to stir up emotions, but there's some old oil there. What God has not yet started. But smiling down, saying, well done. You're using. There's enough oil in every house. Your kids can live the rest of their lives. The Bible says, so she poured. It didn't just say she poured the oil. The Bible says she poured. Mom and Dad, there's never a good time to quit pouring. 7 now. You're still making mistakes at 47. What do you think? What makes you think they're not going to be making mistakes at 17? Just keep pouring. They need the old oil. It's the old oil that brings the miracle. Neighbor says there's enough old oil in your house for a miracle for your family. Maybe only one pot. What is one pot stacked against so much empty? It's just the Lord with his hand on that pot. I'm sorry, Brother Dawson, Brother Whitaker said, I don't know how many vessels they brought. I don't know how much money she owed. It just said she was way past her limit. On the financial loan tower, Bank of America, First National Bank, the bank, her grandpa, she had done exhausted. I don't know how much she owed. All I know is the old oil covered whatever the dollar was. The old oil covered it. And not only covered it, but said, now sell your debts of.